China's capital hit by more than just the virus, now a hailstorm hammering the city, but the shape of the hail taking locals by surprise. Hong Kong's young protesters speaking out about alleged sexual assault during police detentions. This as a successful businessman in the U.S. appealing to the administration to do more to help the protesters. Several former CNN reporters are now working for China's overseas propaganda arm, producing reports in line with the communist regime's narrative.
And it was here Mao Zedong emerged as the leader of the People's Republic of China.
And U.S. criticism of Beijing's politics is growing. White House National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien adding his voice. He warns the communist ideology is a problem for the entire world. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The atmosphere in Beijing is tense. A recent video of Tiananmen Square shows only a handful of tourists, but a large police presence. Some policemen are in plainclothes, and many police vehicles can be seen nearby. Tiananmen Square is located in the center of the Chinese capital and is viewed as a symbol of the communist regime. A Beijing citizen captured the photos and video. He explained that as he entered the square, police scanned his digital health code, a strict software used for virus contact tracing. Only people with a green level health report are allowed to enter Tiananmen Square. But the scanning process wasn't limited to epidemic-related measures. Besides his ID card, he was also required to take every single item out of his pockets for police inspection. They paid extra attention to the books in his bag, examining them closely. He explained that when he looked at the square's main building, 3 plainclothes policemen standing close to him turned to watch him. Another one was also spotted nearby. He said he didn't understand why there were so many police officers with almost no visitors in the area. Now we turn to Beijing's virus situation. According to an internal document, new makeshift hospitals are scheduled to be built in one of the city's districts. The construction plans reportedly include 2 makeshift hospitals and a makeshift lab. But strangely, officials in the area have not reported any confirmed virus cases. So far, there's no information about plans for other districts. The report comes after a makeshift virus testing department was reportedly built inside one of Beijing's biggest hospitals earlier this week. A hailstorm in Beijing has sparked internet buzz. Hailstones as big as chicken eggs have been seen falling from the late June sky. Locals were surprised by the hailstone's unusual shape, which some say resemble mini ice sculptures of the CCP virus. One netizen commented online writing, "You have to believe." And now we look at central China. Hubei province and the capital city Wuhan have been severely damaged by the CCP virus. Now floods are drenching the province too. According to Chinese media, close to 700 reservoirs inside the province have exceeded overflow warning levels. 14 of them are mid to large-scale lakes. Reservoir collapses can cause major damages downstream, especially to the people who live there. Hubei is about half the size of California. A video shows the floodwaters in Chongqing City. According to a speaker in the video, the area's water level rose by about 20 feet within a mere 3 hours. Locals were asked to leave the riverbank immediately. China's propaganda outlet in the U.S. has employed several former CNN employees, producing content that fits Beijing's narratives broadcast to the U.S. audience. NTD's Juliet Song reports.
Several former CNN reporters are now working for China's overseas propaganda arm, producing news and programs in line with the communist regime's narratives. According to a report from the National Pulse, 5 former CNN reporters are now working for TV station CGTN, most of them with a decade or more of experience. CGTN is run by the Chinese Communist Party and is available in almost 30 million U.S. households. It's the overseas arm of the state's media mouthpiece and is controlled by the party's powerful propaganda department. A 2016 video call from Chinese leader Xi Jinping highlights the relationship. While touring CGTN's parent company in Beijing, Xi connected with the North American branch through a video call.
Good morning, President Xi!
After the tour, Xi gave a speech. In it, he called the party-run news outlets the regime's publicity front. He added that all news media run by the party must work to speak for the party's will and its propositions and protect the party's authority and unity. CGTN is part of the effort. Last year, around the time of the 70th anniversary of the communist regime's takeover of China, CGTN rolled out intense positive coverage of the regime, mirroring tones of state media in mainland China. 2 former CNN employees also played a role. Sean Caleb's, former CNN correspondent for over 2 decades, now works as a national correspondent for CGTN. For a special program aired on the 70th anniversary, Caleb's went live in a small town called Zunyi, an important site for the Communist Party's history.
This is a perfect place to kick this off. And it was here Mao Zedong emerged as the leader of the People's Republic of China.
Local media later reported on the special program. The report said Caleb's was thrilled to learn about the town's history and that Mao's consolidation of power is a piece of very important history for foreigners wanting to learn about China. Back in the U.S., former CNN anchor Anand Naidu also broadcast an episode about the anniversary on his show.
Do you see China, with its growing power, playing a bigger role, a bigger global leadership role?
Oh, absolutely.
But the imbalanced reporting on China doesn't stop there. Another former CNN reporter, Jim Spellman, filmed a story on the Communist Party's technological innovation. The report said China is becoming a leader in cutting-edge technologies, but made no mention of the regime's extensive theft of U.S. technology. FBI Director Christopher Wray says Beijing is the biggest threat to America's innovation, thanks to its espionage practices on U.S. companies, from small startups to major corporations. The FBI now has over 2,000 active investigations tracing back to the Chinese government. Wray added that the Chinese regime is trying to shift U.S. political thought into a more friendly, more pro-Chinese Communist Party direction. Reporting by Juliet Song, NTD News.
Hong Kong's pro-democracy protesters are facing more than just tear gas and batons. Allegations of sexual assault by the police have been spreading, but few victims have spoken out for fear of retaliation. As Hong Kong's fate becomes increasingly dire under Beijing's aggression, more victims are starting to speak out.
After this traumatic experience, I was often terrified to tears when I heard loud noises.
More victims are coming out to accuse Hong Kong police of sexual assault committed during last year's pro-democracy protests. Similar allegations have been circulating since the start of the protests, but few have spoken out for fear of retaliation. However, that's starting to change. In a newly published video, victims are asking the world to stand up against what they call the raping of Hong Kong. One 17-year-old student who appears in the video recounted her experience during a press conference.
I also started to get nightmares. I don't want to admit I had an emotional breakdown because of the police's sexual harassment.
Sonia Ng, a student from the Chinese University of Hong Kong, is also featured in the video. The 25-year-old used her real name to make the allegation last October. In a heartbreaking speech on campus, she pleaded with school officials to support the students. Concerns over the assaults made global headlines last year when a 19-year-old woman filed a complaint in October against Hong Kong's police force. She said she was gang raped during detention and later discovered she was pregnant. But last month, Hong Kong's police commissioner issued orders to arrest the teenager for giving what was called a false testimony. The teenager has since fled Hong Kong. Hong Kong's police force denied the allegations, but last November, South Korea's public broadcaster, one of the area's biggest television networks, interviewed an anonymous Hong Kong police officer. The policeman said that cases of sexual assault are not only real, but more widespread than people realize.
有兩單，咁就有被跟進嘅示威者被強姦嘅案件啦。咁就係由醫護人員去證實咗嘅，即係唔止兩單啦，但係起碼有兩單係被咁樣去跟進咯。但係實際嘅數字就只會更多咯。
A Hong Kong organization conducted a questionnaire last winter. Almost 70 responses were received, all of them alleging sexual assault while in detention. Nearly half of them decided not to report it because the perpetrators are police or other law enforcement staff. There's a widespread suspicion among protesters that some of the police are not local law enforcement, but police sent from mainland China. In the end of the video, the victims voiced concern over Beijing's increasing crackdown on Hong Kong and asked the U.S. for help.
We appeal to you, America, the leader of the free world. Please stand with us, and we will light the way for a new China to come into the world.
We are calling for your help.
Reporting by Penny Zhou, NTD News.
A Hong Kong businessman who used to invest heavily in China is now in Washington, D.C. He's pushing to designate the Chinese Communist Party as a criminal organization. NTD's Penny Zhou has more on this story.
When the Chinese Communist Party said they would reform and open China in the 1980s, Hong Kong businessman Elmer Yun was among the first to believe that the CCP truly meant to change. Yun invested heavily in southern China, thinking he could be part of the force to push China into a free economy and open society. He said many high-level officials visited his digital watch factory at the time, including the father of current communist leader Xi Jinping. Today, Yun is in Washington, D.C., and doing everything he can to get away from the Chinese regime. This change started last year, when he witnessed the police brutality against protesters, many of whom were teenagers.
They've all been beaten and then terrorized, and the girls, the pretty ones, have been sexually abused, and some have been murdered, and so on. It's terrible, but it's not the deed of the Hong Kong police. It's really the military police from mainland China dressed in Hong Kong police uniform.
He said students with arrest records for their protests in Hong Kong can be denied entry into schools and turned away from good jobs. That's why he is now meeting with U.S. lawmakers, asking for visas for the U.S. protesters so they can come to study at U.S. universities. Meanwhile, Yun is calling for stronger sanctions against the Chinese Communist Party to cut off their access to U.S. dollars.
We need to turn off the tap on U.S. dollars in and out of Hong Kong, and later in and out of mainland China. That is the only way they understand.
He also advocated for a referendum to determine Hong Kong's fate. He said since Beijing hasn't fulfilled its promise of Hong Kong's freedom under the joint declaration, the future of Hong Kong should be decided by the Hong Kongers themselves.
We want them to give the sovereignty back to the people of Hong Kong.
Yun's advocacy comes at personal cost. Before publicly speaking against the CCP, he already closed all of his businesses in mainland China.
I have 6 children and 4 grandchildren. I don't want them to live under a totalitarian regime. So I told all my friends, business associates, no, I'm not going to work for this communist regime.
And his safety is also at stake. Beijing is currently pushing the law to criminalize activities deemed as security threats by the CCP.
They can say that I'm colluding with the foreign government, U.S. government, or try to split the country and all kinds of, the communist accusation means nothing to me, but that's what they're going to say. And if the law is passed, they can arrest me and do all kinds of things.
He said his family will need to escape Hong Kong if Beijing brings the new national security law into force.
If it's really terrible, then they will have to run. They have to leave. And but somebody has to speak out. If they can keep doing this, later on, if they succeed in this one belt, one road, every country will suffer the same as Hong Kong. No difference.
Yuan is trying to persuade the U.S. to designate the CCP as a criminal organization, saying it's the most effective sanction to deter its aggression.
If you really want to get to the bottom of this, people have to work and get rid of the CCP. Right? If they are there, they'll come back. They're very smart and very deceitful. So the whole world need to work together and basically get rid of CCP. So sanction everything, do everything, decouple with them. So they have to be like the USSR. They have to give up communism.
Reporting by Penny Zhou, NTD News.
According to Chinese authorities, the country's health tracking system, which works via mobile device tracking, is a protective measure designed to combat the pandemic. But there's another motive behind it. An internal document tells us more.
Since the start of the CCP virus epidemic, the Chinese Communist regime has been strongly promoting its so-called health code. It's a digital QR code installed on cell phones and features 3 status colors: red, yellow, green. The system tracks users' daily routines, capturing their movements all the way from their front doors to subways, supermarkets, restaurants, workplaces, and finally back home. If the phone's owner ventures too close to a confirmed virus patient or to where a patient has recently been, the health code's color will degrade from green to yellow or even down to red. Green means the user is free to move around as usual, but a red indicator bars its owner from many daily activities, including riding the bus, entering supermarkets, or even leaving their neighborhood. The Chinese Communist Party says the system is essential to controlling the outbreak, but one internal document from Hebei province shows that the regime's political goals seem to be more important than the health of the people. In the document, so-called political stability was mentioned 3 times as related to the use of the health code software. It also noted that the country's National Two Sessions Assembly will be held soon, which stands as one of China's most important political events. The document says the tracking system is essential to ensure it runs as normal. It further explains that in all levels of the city, the health code should be used to grant entry to public areas, including train and bus stations, shopping malls, hospitals, scenic places, and restaurants. Why? To ensure safety and political stability. But in practice, the health code holds the power to severely limit people's movements and may be used to gain control of them. One mother in Wuhan lost her daughter due to the CCP virus. Because of China's cover-up, they didn't know the virus was contagious and didn't practice prevention measures, resulting in her infection. It happened before the Chinese regime admitted that human-to-human transmission was possible. The mother has been trying to hold the authorities accountable for months now. Authorities see her behavior as an effort to stir up trouble and damage social stability. She's been suppressed by police as a result. A Wuhan citizen told us that now, thanks to the health code, the mother can't even leave her neighborhood because she lacks green health status.
She's been barred from leaving the neighborhood to protect so-called stability. Her health code is not correct. The authorities control her health code, so she can't go out.
Elsewhere, a Beijing citizen told us that everything in China is designed to serve the communist regime, including the health code.
Health code will be used to monitor the people in all areas for sure. Even the first article of the guideline of the General Association of Artists is that art serves politics. For example, CCTV is a party-run media. Companies like Huawei, ZTE, and Hikvision are using various high-tech methods to deal with common people.
A Wuhan netizen likened the current situation in China to the film 1984, adding that the regime's monitoring of its own people is everywhere. NTD News.
The Trump administration's criticism of Beijing's politics is growing. White House National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien is adding his voice to the administration's disapproval. He says the Chinese Communist Party's goal is to manipulate the American people and the government, damage its economy, and undermine its sovereignty. He made it clear that the CCP's aggressive expansionism is a problem for the entire world due to its communist ideology and, among other things, its crackdown on human rights. According to O'Brien, Americans should be concerned not only for the Chinese people but for themselves, because the Communist Party aims to remake the world with its communist ideology. But he added that the days of American naivety regarding the People's Republic of China is over. The U.S.-China Commission, or USCC, held a panel on China's strategic approach to the U.S. The experts who testified all agreed Beijing has long viewed Washington as an adversary. Beijing views Washington as its main factor in external security challenges. That covers everything from the military, global powers, economy, and even the virus response. Author of award-winning book The Beautiful Country in the Middle Kingdom, America and China, 1996 to the present, John Pomfret, said amidst today's fight against the virus, Beijing contrasts what it calls American failures with what it calls to be a successful suppression of the pandemic. In its views of the global power struggle, Europe has become a key location for Beijing's competition with Washington for economic and technological supremacy. Assistant Professor of National Security Studies Robert Ellis says while China calls its engagements a win-win for all countries involved, in reality it's a China-first policy. The panel concluded the U.S. must offer fact-based responses to Beijing's version of events and that the U.S. should invest more at home. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo issued a report on 2019's anti-terrorism situation. In it, he raised concerns about the Chinese Communist Party's unprovoked aggression and malign activities, particularly in Europe. He noted that it's not only the U.S. that takes that view. He said EU foreign ministers also agree and clearly recognize the threat that China poses to the free world and to the rule of law. The report also covers topics like the virus, Hong Kong, and Chinese tech giant Huawei. Pompeo ended on a lighter note, saying that just in case anyone thinks he only speaks badly of the regime, he praised China for removing pangolins, a species of mammals found in Asia, from the country's official list of traditional medicines. He called it great news and the right direction toward ending high-risk wildlife wet markets. Pompeo also said in another statement that more and more countries are waking up to the threats posed by the Chinese regime. He explained China's telecoms company Huawei is losing more and more buyers, including the Czech Republic, Poland, Sweden, Estonia, Romania, Denmark, and Latvia. Recently, Greece agreed to use Ericsson rather than Huawei to develop its 5G infrastructure. Likewise, he noted major world players in the telecoms world are also waking up and cutting ties with China's surveillance state. That includes companies in France, India, Australia, South Korea, Japan, and the UK. And recently, all three Canadian telecoms companies found new partners, as public opinion was overwhelmingly against allowing Huawei to build Canada's 5G networks. And some new developments have emerged regarding Chinese tech giant Huawei and Canada. Back in 2018, China detained former Canadian diplomat Michael Kovrig and entrepreneur Michael Spavor. The detention followed Canada's arrest of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou, who the U.S. has accused of bank fraud. She was supposed to be extradited to the U.S. China has repeatedly denied that there was any connection between the two issues. The regime even had urged the Canadian Prime Minister to stop making irresponsible remarks by claiming the detention of the two Canadians had anything to do with Ms. Meng. Earlier this week, China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that if Canada sets Ms. Meng free, it could affect the fate of the two Canadians. But Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he won't take the offer because it's not in line with the independence principles that the Canadian justice system holds.
And if countries around the world, including China, realize that by arbitrarily arresting random Canadians, they can get what they want out of Canada politically, well, that makes an awful lot more Canadians who travel around the world vulnerable to that kind of pressure.
A Kenyan court has deemed a China-funded railway project in Kenya illegal. That's because the Kenyan government didn't put up the project for tender and only negotiated with the Chinese regime. The project, worth over $3 billion, is part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. The court's ruling could have major implications for other similar projects, although Kenya's government could still appeal to the Supreme Court. More and more countries are investigating their Confucius institutes and probing whether they are used by the Chinese regime as tools of influence, censorship, and discrimination. In Germany, a state parliament had the first hearing ever probing the institute's role. NTD's Germany correspondent Christian Watson has the story.
On Tuesday, the Bavarian parliament had Germany's first hearing on Confucius institutes. The Chinese regime has set up those organizations, usually at universities, formally to promote Chinese culture. Critics say they are part of the CCP's global soft power campaign. In Bavaria, one member of parliament had to threaten to sue before the government revealed that the Confucius Institute in Nuremberg has been funded with taxpayer money for 6 years.
As a member of parliament, one is somewhat wary if, of all things, the cooperation with the Chinese Communist Party or its extended arm through Confucius Institutes is kept secret.
A former state governor denied the institute is part of Beijing influence operations.
And I consider this partnership with sponsorship to be a very, very important argument because it enables wise leadership to say we are not just the extended arm of Beijing, but we are the bridge that has to promote cultural exchange.
He also said the taxpayer-funded subsidies allow the institute to be more independent from Beijing, and there are no taboo topics. Doris Liu, director of the documentary In the Name of Confucius, does not find this convincing. She said she met 3 representatives of German Confucius Institutes who told her they had to sign a paper agreeing not to discuss certain topics. Those include independence for Taiwan and Tibet, concentration camps in Xinjiang, and the Tiananmen Square massacre. She also points out a discrimination policy practiced at all institutes.
And Confucius Institutes also discriminate people who practice Falun Gong, which is a breach to human rights codes in any democratic country.
This requirement is even listed on the English language website of Hanban, the agency under which the CCP's education ministry is operating the institutes. Falun Gong is a spiritual practice based on truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance that has been persecuted in China for over 20 years. Reporting by Christian Watson, NTD News, Berlin.
As all 50 states start opening their economies, the numbers of infections in some states are also climbing. Vice President Mike Pence says the administration is working with state leaders to respond. He praised the resilience of the American people.
After nearly 4 months of being shut down due to the CCP virus pandemic, the U.S. is now on a straight path to economic recovery. Vice President Mike Pence spoke at Lordstown, Ohio to give his remarks.
With all the American people are doing, we're putting America back to work. Today's one more example of a great American comeback.
Currently, all 50 states have started to open up their economies. Unemployment dropped to 13% and 3 million jobs were created. But while the economy improves, the possibility of another virus outbreak is looming over the U.S. Wednesday saw over 34,000 new coronavirus cases, the highest since April. Virus numbers are still increasing in 29 states, with California, Texas, and Florida being the highest. National Economic Advisor Larry Kudlow said, however, that the hotspots are no reason for the country to shut back down.
So we're going to see these things, but the economy is not going to be closed down again. There may be certain places where there is. That's up to the local authorities. I don't deny that.
The vice president said he'll be visiting Texas and Arizona to meet with their governors and health officials.
Governors of the tri-state area say visitors from states with high infection rates have to self-quarantine when they arrive. Earlier this week, some states reported record increases in virus infections.
New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut's governors say visitors from states with high infection rates must self-quarantine for 14 days on arrival.
This is a smart thing to do. We have taken our people, the 3 of us, these 3 states, through hell and back. And the last thing we need to do right now is to subject our folks to another round.
The states with high infection rates are mainly clustered in the South, with the exception of Utah and Washington. The announcement came as the U.S. recorded the second largest increase in virus cases since the health crisis began. Earlier this week, 5 states recorded their highest increase in infection numbers since the outbreak began. New York was for a time the center of the pandemic in the U.S., but has since lowered its rate of infection.
Around the world, the tourism industry is suffering since virus shutdowns began. But in Italy, since lockdown restrictions have loosened, more people are hitting the hiking trails.
Laura Lodone is responsible for tourism at the biggest entrepreneurs confederation in Italy. She's positive about the growing trend of outdoor and ecotourism.
We see pale hints of recovery in seaside tourism because it's Italians themselves who are rescheduling holidays at the seaside.
Andrea Broghi is a clear example of how outdoor and local tourism have merged into an unexpected new trend. A year ago, he set up a company that offers hiking tours as a way to increase communities' understanding of their environment and encourage local tourism.
Luckily, we spotted the growing trend of tourism and ecotourism. Our hope is that people will abandon the mass tourism approach.
One of the hikes on offer is a trail. It winds among giant trees in a forest in the south of Florence. Most of the hikers live nearby.
Very often people do not see how many interesting things they have before their eyes unless there is someone who lights your interest.
For Broghi, this is a new form of ecotourism. Coupled with a new environmental awareness among Italians post-lockdown, it has the potential to decrease mass tourism in the country.
Even in Tuscany, despite the bad time we are living through, we're creating new opportunities in much more valuable clusters than before.
Fears about the decline of mass tourism are tangible in Tuscany, in urban areas and in the countryside. Many areas which had bet all their development on international tourism or food and beverage are facing a year with close to no revenue and with no other industrial or productive alternatives. Lodone believes the new forms of eco-awareness and short-haul travel for locals can rebalance many areas. She says it can bring sustainable development to areas she says have relied too much on international tourism.
A moment worth celebrating. The Eiffel Tower, the so-called Iron Lady of France, reopens its doors to visitors.
Having the tower closed for 104 days was really sad for all of us. Today, all teams and I are really happy to open it again.
There are some operational changes to keep the public safe from the virus, which requires a bit of exercise.
There are 674 steps to climb to get to the tower's second floor. Visitors are encouraged to take this route because the elevator can't welcome many people with the social distancing rules.
The monument usually welcomes 23,000 visitors, of which 80% are foreign tourists, 10% from the United States. The Management Society now expects to have 3,000 to 4,000 per day of mostly French visitors. According to the Eiffel Tower management head, there is uncertainty due to the virus situation, but the tower had to open again.
Of course, we would like to welcome back our tourists from the United States as well as other countries. We've put in place all of the safety measures for them, but now it depends on whether tourists want to come. The situation remains unpredictable.
The 3-month lockdown represented a loss of 27 million euros or $30 million US. The Eiffel Tower was built in 1889 and was, at the time, the highest monument in the world. The first building to take over the record was the Chrysler Building in New York City, 40 years later. Report by David Vives, NTD News.
Here at China in Focus, we dedicate ourselves to bringing you truthful, unbiased reporting. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the latest updates, and see you tomorrow.